In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the Trim Edit window in Final Cut. In the Final Cut beginner lesson, we learned to shorten a clip in the timeline using the blade tool. Now we're going to look at a much more powerful tool that lets you easily make a clip shorter or longer in the timeline, the Trim tool. Make sure your project is open and your sequence is in the timeline. Double-click on an edit point between two clips to open the Trim Edit window. As you near the edit point, you should see the arrow cursor turn into two parallel lines with small arrows pointing left and right before double-clicking. The Trim Edit window will open where your viewer and canvas were. Let's just take a quick look at the geography of this window. If you look at the very top, you'll see the words Trim Edit. You'll also see a bright green line above both windows, which means that both windows are active. The image on the left is the last frame of the outgoing shot at the edit point that you double-clicked on the timeline, and the image on the right is the first frame of the incoming shot. Below the two windows, you'll see the buttons -5, -1, and +1 and +5. These are the Trim Forward and Trim Backward buttons. For now, uncheck the dynamic box between the two sets of buttons. We'll learn about dynamic trimming in the Final Cut Pro Advanced lesson. I want to trim some of the frames off the end of my outgoing shot on the frame to the left. Since I want to trim the left shot, I need to click in the middle of the window on the left. Notice that the bright green bar is now only over the left window. Now I come down to my Trim Forward and Trim Backward buttons. Since I'm removing frames from the shot on the left, I'm going to click the -1 button to trim back one frame at a time. The -5 button trims back 5 frames at a time. Notice that as I click, the image on the left is changing to reflect the trim as I'm making it. Also notice that the image on the right, the outgoing shot, is not moving because the window doesn't have a bright green line over it. That's good because I like that shot just the way it is. If you do see the shot on the right moving at the same time as the shot on the left, double check that the bright green line is only over the left image. When I think I'm close to where I want the trim to be, I can press the space bar on my keyboard to preview the edit. The playhead will back up a couple of seconds and play through the edit point. This will loop over and over until I press the space bar again. Now, if I want to adjust the trim, I just use the Trim Forward and Backward buttons. When I'm happy with the way the edit looks, I just click on the blank spot in my timeline and the trim window closes and my trim is saved. Now I want to add frames to the beginning of a shot. So I double-click on the edit point before the shot I want to add the frames to, and it opens the trim window again. Since I'm trimming the incoming shot this time, or the one on the right, I need to click once on the right window so that the bright green bar is only above the right side. Here's where it gets a little tricky. You might think I should click the +1 or +5 buttons to add frames, but just remember that the plus signs and the minus signs don't mean add or subtract. They mean trim forward, plus, or trim backward, minus. So I actually need to click on the trim backward or the minus buttons to get more frames at the front of my shot at the right. An easy way to tell that you're trimming the correct direction is just to look at your timeline. You can see the shot in the timeline getting longer or shorter, and you can also look at the image on the right to see if it's moving in the direction that you want. Again, I can press the spacebar to preview my trim, and when I like it, I just click on a blank spot on my timeline to close the trim tool and save all of my changes. You might be asking yourself, how can I add frames back to a shot? Where does that extra footage come from? Final Cut actually goes back to your original clip in the browser and adds frames from there. So if when I'm trimming, I reach either the beginning or the end of the original clip that I captured, a yellow message box will show up in the trim window that says Media Limit. That's because Final Cut can't find any more frames in that original clip. If you want to add frames to one shot and take away frames from the next shot, just leave the bright green lines above both windows. So if I trim forward, say, 10 frames, the shot on the left will overwrite the shot on the right by 10 frames. You'll also see the images on both sides change at the same time. This is called a centered trim. So that's it. You can see how handy the trim tool can be as you fine-tune your movie.